One commander's genius was silenced, not by the enemy, but by his own leaders. Political games, battlefield delays, lives lost while decisions were debated. A slap that changed history. The September decision that halted victory. What Patton saw that Eisenhower ignored. But why did they really stop him? Before we dive in, drop a comment telling us where you're watching from, what time it is for you right now. A slap that changed history. August 1943, Sicily, a hospital tent. General George S. Patton walked among wounded soldiers, men who had survived brutal combat. But when he reached one soldier sitting quietly, something inside Patton snapped. The man had no visible injuries. Patton accused him of cowardice. Then, in front of everyone, he slapped him across the face. Days later, he did it again at another hospital. Word spread fast. Newspapers picked up the story. The American public was shocked. Military leaders were furious. This wasn't just a moment of anger. This was a scandal that would follow Patton for the rest of his career. President Franklin D. Roosevelt and Army Chief George Marshall had to make a choice: protect Patton's reputation or remove him from command. They chose something in between. But that decision would echo through the entire war, because the man who could win battles faster than anyone else had just made himself a political problem. And problems like that don't get promoted, they get controlled. But the slap wasn't the only reason they feared him. Political liability. Patton wasn't just aggressive on the battlefield, he was aggressive everywhere. He spoke his mind without thinking about consequences. He insulted allies. He made bold claims in front of reporters. He didn't care about politics, protocol, or public image, and that made him dangerous, not to the enemy, to his own leaders. George Marshall and Franklin D. Roosevelt knew the war wasn't just about winning battles, it was about managing relationships. The Allies weren't a unified army, they were a fragile partnership. British Prime Minister Winston Churchill had strong opinions. Field Marshal Montgomery had a massive ego. Keeping everyone working together required patience, diplomacy, and careful words. Patton had none of those qualities. He was brilliant at war, but terrible at politics. And in 1944, as the Allies prepared for the biggest operation in history, they needed a supreme commander who could keep the coalition from falling apart. Patton could win wars, but he couldn't win arguments without making enemies. So they turned to someone completely different.
Diplomatic skills. Dwight D. Eisenhower wasn't the most experienced battlefield commander. He hadn't led troops in combat like Patton had. But he had something more valuable in the eyes of Washington and London. He knew how to manage people. Eisenhower was calm under pressure. He listened. He made allies feel heard. He smoothed over disagreements before they became disasters. When Churchill and Montgomery clashed with American generals, Eisenhower found ways to keep everyone moving forward. He understood that winning the war required more than tactics. It required trust. Roosevelt and Marshall saw this clearly. They needed someone who could handle the politics, the egos, and the endless complications of a multinational force. Patton could charge across Europe and crush the enemy in days, but Eisenhower could hold the entire Allied coalition together for years, and in their eyes, that was more important. So Eisenhower was named Supreme Allied Commander. Patton was told to wait, to follow orders, to stay quiet. But Patton had no intention of staying quiet. Role distinction. The decision was clear. Patton would not lead the Allies. Instead, he would do what he did best: fight. U.S. leadership believed Patton's talents were too valuable to waste on meetings and diplomatic dinners. His genius was on the battlefield, not in a planning room. So they gave him command of the Third Army, a powerful force designed to move fast, hit hard, and break through enemy lines. It was the perfect role for someone like Patton. Eisenhower would handle strategy and politics. Patton would handle destruction. On paper, it made sense. Use each man where he's strongest. But in reality, it created tension. Patton felt undervalued. He believed he was being held back. And soon he would be proven right, because when the Allies needed speed and aggression, they hesitated, they delayed, they chose caution over boldness. And that decision, Patton believed, would cost lives. Because while Eisenhower was managing personalities, the enemy was regrouping. And then came September 1944. The September decision that halted victory. September 1944. Patton's Third Army was moving like lightning across France. Towns fell in days. Enemy forces scattered. The German army was retreating in chaos. Patton saw an opportunity, a chance to push straight into Germany, cross the Rhine River, and end the war before winter. He had the momentum. He had the men. All he needed was fuel and supplies. But then the orders came. Stop. His supply lines were being redirected. Fuel, ammunition, and resources were being sent north to support British Field Marshal Montgomery's Operation Market Garden, a massive airborne mission designed to capture key bridges in the Netherlands. Patton was furious. He believed his advance could have ended the war in weeks, saving thousands of lives. Instead, he was forced to sit and wait while Montgomery's operation unfolded. And when Market Garden failed, costing heavy losses, Patton's anger turned to heartbreak. He later wrote that the decision cost a great many thousand men. But was he right, or was he overconfident? Patton's view. Patton was convinced if he had been given full support in September 1944, the war would have ended by Christmas. He believed his Third Army could have punched through German defenses, crossed the Rhine, and forced a total retreat. In his mind, every day of delay meant more soldiers lost, more battles fought, more families destroyed. He didn't understand why Eisenhower wouldn't let him finish the job. To Patton, war wasn't about caution. It was about speed, shock, and total aggression. He felt betrayed. He felt misunderstood. And he made sure everyone knew it. In letters and private conversations, Patton argued that the leadership's obsession with broad front strategy, advancing slowly across the entire front instead of concentrating force in one breakthrough, was costing lives needlessly. He believed the best way to save soldiers was to move so fast the enemy couldn't recover. But his superiors didn't see it that way, and many historians agree. Patton was wrong. Counterarguments. Most military historians, including commanders like Eisenhower and Omar Bradley, believed Patton's plan was unrealistic. Yes, his army was moving fast, but it was also running out of fuel. Supply lines were stretched thin. The logistics of keeping an entire army fed, armed, and moving across Europe were incredibly complex. Even if Patton had pushed forward, he might have run out of resources deep inside enemy territory, leaving his men vulnerable. Additionally, battles like the Battle of the Bulge and the Hurtgen Forest, where heavy losses occurred, were part of the overall Allied strategy, not just the result of one man being held back. Eisenhower's broad front approach was designed to prevent the Germans from concentrating their forces and launching a devastating counterattack. It was slower, yes, but it was safer. And while Patton saw delay as deadly, his superiors saw recklessness as even deadlier. The debate continues today, but there's one more truth Patton never accepted.
Political reality. Even if Patton had reached Berlin first, it wouldn't have changed the final outcome. By February 1945, Allied leaders had already met at Yalta and agreed on how Europe would be divided after the war. Germany would be split into occupation zones, American, British, French, and Soviet. Those borders were political decisions, not military ones. Even if Patton had taken Berlin weeks earlier, the Western Allies would have had to withdraw and hand much of Eastern Germany to the Soviets anyway. This is what Patton saw that Eisenhower ignored. The war wasn't just being fought on battlefields, it was being shaped in conference rooms. Patton believed they were giving up too much to politics, but Eisenhower understood something Patton never accepted. Sometimes wars are won by diplomacy, not speed. In the end, Patton's denial of supreme command was a calculated decision based on his temperament, not his skill. And whether it cost thousands of lives remains one of history's greatest debates. The general who could have ended the war was stopped by his own side. So was Patton denied command because of one slap, or because leaders feared what he might achieve? History still debates whether his aggression could have saved thousands or cost even more. What we know for sure, the man who terrified enemies was stopped by his own allies. If this story shocked you, hit that like button and subscribe for more untold history. Drop a comment. Was stopping Patton the right decision or the greatest mistake of World War II?